Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Jack Morton Auditorium and the School of Media and Public Affairs. We're delighted that you're here. I'm Frank Sesno. I have the privilege of being director of the School of Media and Public Affairs. And tonight we wanted to take a particular look at what's happening in conservative media. Lord knows there's enough attention on what's happening in liberal media and whether there's a liberal bias. But there's a large, respectable, and actually very dynamic conservative media that's trying to figure out how it charts its way through the Trump administration. So I'm very pleased to say that I'm actually quite delighted at this, that we are co-sponsoring this event with GW College Republicans and with GW Young America's Foundation. So thanks to them for contributing and for helping us to promote this. You guys are here, yes? Thank you, thank you. I expect questions from you, right? Good, tough questions, yes, before we're done. Also thanks to our National Council, which is in town for our National Council meeting, which will be taking place tomorrow. Through the support of our National Council and others, we're able to do events like this, and it's really important to us to be able to connect students and ideas and the amazing people who are around in Washington. I would like to actually turn it over to one of our National Council members to open this event. I mean, we're really, really fortunate here that we're able to draw to our community from so many wonderful people who, many of whom, not all, went to GW as students and have taken that knowledge and inspiration out into the world. Howard Opinski certainly has done that. Howard is now president of a company called 5 Blocks, right? And 5 Blocks is a digital consulting and technology company focused on reputation management. So he's busy these days. And I hope he's doing a lot of reputation managing. He knows the digital and strategic communication world very, very well because he's been in it for a very long time. Howard has his roots in politics. He managed several campaigns. He worked up on the Hill, and he was John McCain's press secretary in his 2000 presidential bid. So Howard has seen media, and both liberal and conservative media, from a lot of different perspectives. And I asked him to bring that perspective that he has from his experience, to get us started here. And I think one of the questions I would ask you to keep in mind as we speak here is, and it's a very fundamental question to media now, are we only speaking within and to our own bubbles, or are we speaking across? And if we're speaking across, what is the role of liberal and conservative media? And tonight the focus will be on the conservative media. Howard, it's yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks. Thank you, Frank. It's good to see everybody, especially my fellow council members, who I'm looking forward to spending time with tomorrow. Before I start, I just want to give a quick shout out to SMPA, to GW. These events are just so remarkable. I love I think it's either an Instagram or a Twitter feed, I can't remember where I see it, where they have all these only in GW moments, and pictures of students all over running into famous people like Bill Kristol or Jennifer Rubin, who will be here, or on campus walking around with George in a beautiful setting. And they should take a picture of this, because these are the kinds of things at GW that you don't get in other places. There's wonderful schools, there's other places to go to school, but the program here does a tremendous job of leveraging the community and the people that are affiliated not just with GW, but are in the greater Washington area from lots of different walks of life, and to the benefit, I think, of all of the students here. And so it's terrific to be able to be a part of that, a small part of that, part of the board, and also to have an opportunity to participate in events like this. So you should feel very fortunate to be able to be in a place where you get a chance to do these kinds of things. So with my advertisement out of the way, as Frank said, I've had an opportunity, although, Frank, I have to say, you made me sound like I'm extraordinarily old, but I've seen this for a while now from a lot of different perspectives. And I think, with conservative media, I can remember, and I don't want to sound so old that I remember the old days, but you know, I do remember reading the first time I had a chance to read the National Review when the Weekly Standard started, and how exciting times were to read a different perspective. I thought for myself as a young person in that period of time, from what so much of what I heard even in those days in more mainstream media, and it was very thought-provoking. And I think, you know, whether you were reading Human Events or you were reading the Standard or in the paper day to day, you had a variety of different opinions from which to choose. But I couldn't begin to imagine how different and how varied those opinions would become and where we are today. I think it's fair to say we're in the best of times and the worst of times for conservative media. On the one hand, I think we have a very powerful and broad-reaching conservative media apparatus, whatever you want to call it, that is grown in the country. And I think on the one hand, you have a conservative media that sees its role as promoting power and policy, and really, I think, extending the role of conservatism deeper and deeper into civic life and promoting policies that are shaping the world in a way that conservatives had wanted to for many, many years. On the other hand, I think that the conservative media is playing a role in defining really what do conservatives stand for in 2019. And I think this is perhaps not unique to the conservative media. That the liberal media might be going through a bit of a question as to who they are very soon as well. But I think there's a real question of who are we that conservative media is trying to help answer right now. Conservative media is powering success as well as driving the dialogue, and you know, it's more pervasive than ever before, and there are more platforms than ever before. And so I think it's reflective of the radical changes that are going on in the greater media environment. With so many different ways to communicate, I think the conservative media is leading the way in many cases in using video in new and different ways, of extending the reach through more and aggressive social media, of convening as well. The media in particular, I think, in the right and left is not seen simply as just writing about what's going on, but it's really being a foundation and a place for ideas to nourish and grow. I think some are trying to define or perhaps to redefine conservatism, and while others maybe are focused primarily on promoting the president and promoting a view of conservatism that is new, that is unique and different, and trying to find where does that fit within the long history of conservative philosophy and conservative ideology. So I'm really interested to hear from the panel today about really what is conservative media today. What really is it? Is it something that is it a group of people and writing and thinking that is defining a movement of conservatism? Is it defending what conservatism used to be and trying to bring it back to what it is today? Is it promoting a view that the president has established now of what conservatism is and redefine conservatism in many ways very different than what it's been in the past? And I think all the voices, whether you're in print or you're on video or you're online or you're a public intellectual, are all working towards trying to answer these questions and really look out beyond the next election and say, what is the future of conservatism, and how does it relate to the past, and how can it be very pertinent to our future? So I'll be very curious to hear what everyone has to say. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to join everybody, and thank you for coming. And Frank, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Howard. Appreciate that. Well, why don't I invite the panel up? Come on up, take your seats, and I'll introduce everybody once we get seated. I should say, by the way, and I'd like to welcome our live stream audience. We're live streaming this event. This will also be added to our archive of conversations here that we have here at the School of Media and Public Affairs. So again, welcome to our our live stream audience, and for those of you who are interested in tweeting or anything else, please note the hashtag, hashtag Who's Right GW, so join the conversation there. So welcome to you all. Hello, Bob. You're all the way at the end there. I think we can make this work.
Hey, Frank.
Let's start with Jennifer Rubin. Jennifer is an opinion writer with the Washington Post. How long have you been with the Post now?
8 years.
And an MSNBC contributor?
Correct.
How often are you over on MSNBC?
It varies. Sometimes it seems like all day, every day, and other times we have some time to do other things.
You certainly write a lot about Donald Trump and politics, but the range of your column you consider is what?
It's really both policy and politics, and wrestling with this new phenomenon of the right, and the broader topic that is not only an American problem, but a world problem, which is the attack upon what we used to call liberal, small l, liberal democracy.
And your own political persuasion that you bring to this conversation?
Well,
I read a lot about this.
Yes, exactly. I still think of myself as a center-right person. Other people disagree, but I still believe in free markets. I still believe in immigration. I still believe in American leadership in the world. That, unfortunately, doesn't seem to coincide with Donald Trump's view of conservatism, so we have a difference of opinion.
Bill Kristol is the founder and former editor at large of the Weekly Standard. I remember well when you started that. That was when?
95.
1995. And you came...
Before anyone here was born.
Well, there were a few people who were born here before 1995.
Howard. Yeah,
Presumably before...
No, I'm kidding. I'm 94. Just made
that
it.
makes me feel better, really.
Yeah.
And your background came out of politics. You and I first connected when you were working in the George H.W. Bush administration with a guy named Vice President Dan Quayle.
Yeah, I came to Washington. I taught for a few years after getting a PhD in political philosophy, and came to Washington in '85 to work for Bill Bennett in the Reagan administration, his second term at the Education Department, and then ran a losing political campaign in '88, which was good practice for the future, you know. So, and then was Vice President Quayle's chief of staff when you were covering the White House.
Yeah.
In the George H.W. Bush administration, and then did some politics for a couple of years, and then Fred Barnes and David Brooks and various others said, let's start a weekly conservative magazine.
Why did you start that?
It's funny, there was no National Review, which was the granddaddy of sort of conservative magazines, started by Bill Buckley in 1955, was a bi-weekly then, and published in New York. And this was literally, we started it sort of 2 months before the internet became big, you know? We thought it would go away for a while, you know? It's like, we have actually a cover, like the 5th issue was like Smash the Internet or something. So it's a little.
You were way ahead of your time.
We were really, yeah, we were very far-seeing in our understanding of modern technology, you know? And, but so we actually thought it was important to have a weekly based in Washington. This would be more current reporting, focused on Gingrich had won, the Republicans had won both houses of Congress for the first time in 40 years. In November 1994, I'd been a little involved in that. And so it was really a new moment. I mean, Reagan had governed and Bush, but Republicans had never had Congress. And now it really looked like you could really implement a bunch of policies. Giuliani was implementing some conservative policies in New York, and other governors and mayors. And so it was, so we thought, and this is a good example of how nothing ever works out quite how you think. We thought very important to have a weekly print magazine out of Washington. So within a few years, of course, we were part print and part online. Like
Were you the conservative answer to the New Republic kind of?
Yeah,
Is that what you were trying to
Fred
be?
Barnes came from the New Republic, and Charles Krauthammer, who was a contributing editor of ours, had been at the New Republic. So yeah, very much so. And mixture of ideas, policy, politics, fun analyses of political races, but also culture, books and arts reviews that could be on anything.
At the peak, how many subscribed?
We fluctuate up and down. You can spend money to get subscribers, but then you lose them after. I'd say our natural, we got as high as 100,000, probably as low as 55, 60. Our natural circulation seemed to end up being around 80,000.
Amber Athey, you're the Daily Caller. You're
Correct.
a White House correspondent and the media correspondent.
I was a media and breaking news editor for about a year and a half, and I just became a White House correspondent back in January.
So you're not being forced to write about the media anymore?
I still write about them.
So you
it's
do.
It's so hard to resist.
I wonder why that is. And how many people are familiar with the Daily Caller? Okay, for those who are not.
Yeah, that's good.
For those who are not.
The Daily Caller is a right-leaning digital website. We cover national politics, international politics. We actually have a news foundation that trains conservative reporters. They have an investigative group as well. So we're in the breach every day covering breaking news, politics, Trump, of course, but just about anything that we think our readers might be interested in. We reach tens of millions of people.
So that's what I was going to
every
ask you. So at your height, you had how many subscribers?
Well, 80,000 print.
Okay, 80,000.
We had,
so
of course.
Hold on to your hat. How many uniques do you have a month?
Conservatively, 10 million a month.
Yeah, that's
10 million a month.
Our high was, that's good, but our height was about 5 million a month. And
5 million
Daily
online.
Caller has more content.
Right.
Founded, however, by a Weekly Standard alumnus, I will point out.
Do you know where they are?
Tucker Carlson before he went to the dark side, you know that?
CNN put Tucker Carlson on the air. I just want to know.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, you know,
So it's your fault.
it is our fault. Done. And do you know where your readers, your online readers, are they across the country, around the world, where
Primarily
they clustered?
the big cities, so DC, New York, LA, but we have a lot of Midwestern readers, of course, and a few internationals, actually. I always see people popping up from Australia, which is interesting. Apparently they're launching a CPAC in Australia this year, the inaugural one, so who knew?
All right.
Lots of conservatives out there, I guess.
Kara Zupkus, you're president of GW's Young Americans Foundation chapter. What is that? What is YAF?
Yeah, so Young America's Foundation.
Somebody cheer. You have your friends here?
Ooh, yeah, brought out a lot of people. So we're a conservative group on campus. We're a 501c3, so we're nonpartisan, but we have a wide range of people in our organization.
You're nonpartisan?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We have people all the way from like neocons to libertarians, centrists, so we have a really wide range of people.
Have anybody who's advocating Medicare for all?
Sorry?
Have anybody who wants Medicare for all?
No, weirdly enough, no.
Yeah,
but-
that happened.
yeah.
Okay, so, and you're a student here.
Yes, I am.
Studying?
Political science and journalism.
Did you study journalism?
I did not. I studied government and economics,
At,
Georgetown University.
okay, we'll let that go, that's okay. Not now. So what do you want to do with YAF? What is its role on campus?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely to provide a voice. I think that we're a small minority on campus. It's a very liberal campus, obviously. So we kind of want to provide an alternative to what is now seen as kind of the age of Trump. People feel either they have to completely agree with Trump or they're anti-Trump. So I think we kind of provide a home for conservatives that don't necessarily can't find themselves agreeing 100% with the Republican platform. We have a home for pretty much anyone that kind of identifies.
So how do you handle that Trump range internally, right? You have
Yeah.
some never Trumpers and you have some always Trumpers, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes for interesting discussions. Our executive board and committees can never really agree on anything, so it's always interesting. But I think we kind of hone in on the core conservative values of free enterprise, limited government, American values. I think those are kind of the things that we can all kind of hone in on and agree on.
And finally, we're joined by Bob Garfield, who is co-host of On the Media. On the Media is produced by WNYC in New York. It's available on, what did you tell me, 400 public radio stations?
450 approximately.
And talk about, your approach to media and what you do on this program.
We make fun of it. We make a living finding fault with media, and which has worked out often very badly for the New York Times and much badlier for Fox. And we also look at media's intersection with just about everything else, including politics and culture. We're heavily interested in the First Amendment. We're interested in narrative in general. But we were born as a media criticism show, and I would still say that is the biggest part of our portfolio.
So Bob, let me start with you then, since you're our dedicated media critic here, and you do pretty well criticizing, I think, pretty much everybody. What is your take? I mean, Bill Kristol started the Weekly Standard to be sort of idea central, a very thought-provoking opinion magazine on the right. When people think of conservative media today, probably the first place you think about is Fox News, right? Would that be right? How many of you would say that Fox would be your principal? Okay. That's very different than what you started. It's also a very different Fox than first went on the air. We report, you decide, fair and balanced. It's a very different network now. What's your take of this landscape?
I might quibble with the very different, but because Fox, when it was born, was explicitly designed to be a counter programming to the allegedly liberal media and all of its biases. But so much has changed. Not only do I remember the founding of the Weekly Standard, Bill Kristol's Weekly Standard, I remember reading, I was a subscriber for many years to Irving Kristol's commentary, which along with National Review is one of the granddaddies of conservative thought. A magazine that grounded in intellectual rigor that also defined itself in opposition to, I would say, the liberal mainstream, but did so through argument and evidence and reason. And most of that is Weekly Standard is now gone for a set of reasons that we will discuss later. National Review Online is marginalized. There is not much of conservative media in that tradition remaining anymore. What's the name of the libertarian magazine that's
Reason?
Reason, I would say, still falls generally into that category. But basically, what we have seen in the last 10 years is the utter Limbaugization of right-wing media. And it is...
The Limbaugization.
Limbaugization, where it is, it's polemic, it's screed, it's unhinged from facts and evidence, it's propaganda, it is demagogy, it is, whatever you have to say about the so-called mainstream media, which, by the way, is not a monolith, it's thousands of individual organizations. But in any event, you can say that they hew to a sort of progressive view of the world because, in fact, they do, because there is a very, very large Venn overlap between liberalism and a journalistic ethos, speaking truth to power, afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted, reform, and so forth.
Amber,
there's a lot of overlap there. But whatever you think of mainstream media, they are not what conservative media has become. They are not propagandistic. They are not constantly in the attack mode. They're not about vilification. They're still grounded in evidence and reporting and rigor. And when they're not, we're all over them.
Amber, what's your
Well, I would ask anyone who thinks that the establishment media has not become propaganda or breathlessness to take a look at the Russia reporting over the past 2 years and tell me that that is not pushing a preferred narrative or propaganda. These people told the American people for 2 years that the President of the United States might be guilty of treason. And then we get a letter from Attorney General Bill Barr who says there was no collusion at all between the Trump campaign and Russia.
I get that. The point that Bob was making, though, and I know you wanted to...
I've had the unusual experience of working for the Washington Post, writing for the Weekly Standard, writing for commentary, writing for National Review. And there are some similarities there, but what those organizations do is fundamentally different than what Fox does. And it's this. Whether I was at Bill Kristol's shop or whether I'm at the Washington Post, everything I write is fact-checked. It has the same level of accuracy and demand for objective truth that our news side
So you're
does.
conservative media, but you're mainstream media.
Correct.
You're following certain
correct.
mainstream
But that was
rules.
true at Bill's shop too. We were fact-checked, and we were. I sat down with an editor, or usually over the phone, an editor, and we went through factual issues because there was a fidelity to truth as an objective thing. And actually, objective truth used to be a mainstay belief of conservatism, as opposed to this notion that we have alternate facts and it's anything you want it to be. So there's a fundamentally different mission. We do not intentionally report falsehoods. Do we get things wrong? Yes, we get things wrong. We do not intentionally make excuses for the president or follow him as he meanders from one position to the other. It is a serious intellectual enterprise, as are these legacy conservative outlets, whether it's commentary, where you write 5,000 words, 7,000 words on some erudite subject. But that's not what these are. These are sort of snippets of and auxiliaries to the White House press office.
So, Amber, I want to come back to what you were saying a moment ago and turn that back to, let's leave Russia aside and the liberal media side because we're talking about conservative media here.
Of course.
And what Bob was saying, which is this is a sort of a different ball game. At the Daily Caller, what are your rules of engagement in terms of fact-checking and sitting with your editors? Because you're pretty aggressive, and the Caller's been, it's called Trump out on lots of occasions, but
Correct.
you've also...
Yeah. We don't tie ourselves to Trump at all. That's not what we're about. And in terms of fact-checking standards, ours are just as high, if not higher, than any of the establishment media outlets. And the reason I talk about Russia is because when you look at our coverage of Russia over the past 2 years, we were rightfully skeptical of a lot of these things, and we got it right. When we were writing these stories about Michael Flynn's ties to Turkey, about spying on the Trump campaign, our stories panned out, unlike these places in which you say apparently have higher fact-checking standards than we do. So I'd like to know why that is.
I would actually argue that they didn't get it wrong, and that
Who didn't get it wrong?
The mainstream media. You can point to commentators who were sort of breathless, but you can go back and there's not a single inaccurate story.
Oh, really?
About, excuse me,
Was he under investigation?
Excuse me,
Was he under investigation?
Hang on.
There wasn't in terms of the factual events that happened. Whether those rise to meet a legal level of conspiracy or whether those rise to some politically acceptable standard is another question. But even the fact that she would comment so decisively on a report that none of us has seen is precisely sort of the difference between those outlets and other outlets. You have to be grounded in the facts. We actually don't know what the special counsel found. The president was not exonerated by Mr. Barr's letter. He was not, Mr. Mueller didn't exonerate the president. And you have to, again, go back to the specifics. You have to go back to the facts. You cannot make a wide, sweeping statement, you guys were wrong.
So,
in what specific story and what factual setting?
So, Bill, is this what we've just seen here? This
I'd love to give some examples if
I'll come back.
I'm sure.
I just want to bring everybody in here. And I want to ask Bill about this because this actually bore very directly on the prospects of the Weekly Standard. Where you fall sort of in the Trump camp and how that was perceived within the conservative community. The New York Times, not exactly a liberal of conservatism, but when they wrote about the shutdown of the Weekly Standard, wrote the following. Talk of the shutdown of the Weekly Standard coursed through the magazine's offices for days, and although a meeting with management had been scheduled for Friday, Mr. Hayes, your editor, emailed his staff beforehand to say he was still unsure of their fate. Quote, many media outlets have responded to the challenges of the moment by prioritizing affirmation over information, giving into the pull of polarization and the lure of clickbait, Hayes wrote in his memo. I'm proud that we've remained both conservative and independent. How did the Standard approach the Trump administration? And because you approached them as skeptical, is that why you shut down?
I mean, in part. There are two things going on, like Bob sort of alluded to this, at one time here. I mean, there's Trump, which is a pretty unique phenomenon, which has put all kinds of strains on conservatism and therefore on the conservative media. And then there's technology and with all of its ramifications, which has changed the character of the media world very dramatically. And in some ways, the two came together, I think, and to the disadvantage, in my view, of certainly of the Weekly Standard. I mean, we were fine with digital and online, and had lots of people, more people read us at the end online than the print magazine. So for us, yeah, it was Trump. We were owned by someone who didn't like a magazine that was pretty consistently critical of the president. And it's a free country, and he owned it, and he could shut it down. I think we could have gotten someone else to buy it. He didn't choose to do that. He had another magazine. He wanted to take over the subscriptions and so forth. So, there's always been sort of highbrow and middlebrow and lowbrow conservative media. There's always been the same on the left. It's not like there weren't columnists who were much more, to the barricades and much more cheerleaders, and others who were more, thinking for themselves and skeptical. And there were just differences. There were libertarians, there were social conservatives, paleoconservatives, neoconservatives. So I don't know how much that has changed or how decisively. I guess I mean, I'll just say this about National Review. Bill Buckley started National Review in 1955. Everyone looks back, and Buckley was a wonderful character, and there was a lot of great stuff in that magazine. There was also a lot of, honestly, stuff that we would look back at with some, not quite horror, but disdain today, I suppose. Big defense of the South and segregation, and a certain amount of cheerleading. I mean, I was 11 years old, I guess, in the 1964 presidential campaign, and my parents got National Review at home in New York, and knew Buckley very slightly at that point, but I read it. I was kind of a young conservative, mostly just rebelling against my peers and against the age and New York in the 60s. So I actually wasn't even rooting for Goldwater because I thought it just seemed a little too crazy, but I thought it was interesting at least. And I read National Review, and I remember asking my father, a couple of weeks before the election, I've been reading National Review here every 2 weeks. It comes home. I guess Goldwater really has a chance, right? There's this hidden vote. And this was like a big thing if you go back and look in the 63 score. The pollsters had it all wrong. There was a silent vote out there in America that was going to come to the polls and surprise everyone. And then Goldwater lost 61-39, and I guess the pollsters didn't have it so wrong. And so there was a fair amount of cheerleading on the part of even the more esteemed magazines back then. So I'm a little less fatalistic, maybe, that everything's just gone terribly. They're still. They
were right. They were just 52 years early.
Well, they were 60. That's true.
Carl,
I'm a little less. I guess I'll just say this. I mean, life changes very quickly. There are all these surprises. Obviously, National Review looked in '65, honestly, mid-'60s, as if. That was an interesting experiment. There was no support for it. It was going nowhere. Neoconservatives were kind of the new thing in the late 60s, early 70s. And then Reagan gets himself elected governor of California twice, loses in 76, wins in 80, and suddenly National Review is the magazine that everyone in the White House listens to, sort of the equivalent of today of Trump with perhaps maybe sort of the Daily Caller or Breitbart or some other websites and magazines on the right, Fox certainly. So, these things can reverse more quickly than one thinks, I think, both in terms of the politics and to some degree in terms of technology. I mean, the web, seems to reward short items, quick items, fast items, but there's recent, evidence, and a lot of people are thinking about this, that National Affairs, which is a very high-tone quarterly successor to the Public Interest, the magazine my father edited, 5,000 to 6,000 word pieces. But because it's a quarterly, they put them up. They're up for 3 months.
Right.
They get literally 20 times more readers than pieces in the Public Interest,
Yeah,
which
Bill,
is a very
that is
fine
a
magazine
huge point.
10, 20 years ago. So maybe these things have a certain, it's a little more complicated what the effects of some of these things are than others. I don't know.
This goes beyond ideology. This goes right to business model, because one thing that a number of people have discovered, most especially Fox, but equally, I guess, Breitbart and others, Daily Caller, is that, and I don't know if you guys remember when people still believed in science, but science has demonstrated that you get more response from incendiary, emotional
I was just talking
material.
to a neurologist about this today, that our brain is wired for that.
It is wired, and it is measurable. And I promise you, Facebook knows the exact constant for the value of incendiary content. And if you can enrage, if you can infuriate, if you can validate the worldview of the audience, which is also selected in filter bubbles already, you will get more response, more clicks, more money. And that was how Fox became the most valuable television franchise on cable. You should know that when Frank tried to get Fox to participate in this panel, what was their response?
I'm glad you asked me that, Bob, because I have that right here. They said, we did invite Fox to attend, but they explained they were not able to make it. And they reminded us, we do not consider ourselves conservative media. We are the leading cable news organization in the
Which is a lie. It's just simply a lie. It is a business that is built on a founding lie. And they don't, that's okay, because the checks don't bounce.
But Fox, you're conflating two very different things here. I mean, Fox, I think, is a big issue and question, and I think already, it was a little bit of it was always conservative. It's become, I think, in the last 5, 6 years, conspiratorial and much more demagogic, and I think that's damaged the country some. But that's a very different phenomenon from clicks and the web, which incidentally is not a good business model. I mean, it's very much to the Daily Caller's credit that they do manage to make money, but most don't. And in fact, it's a losing business model to chase clicks in search of advertising.
Well, it's a losing business model for publications, but certainly not for the platforms.
Facebook, I don't agree with that. It's totally a losing business model for the platforms. Who's making money chasing clicks?
Facebook is.
Yeah, well, that is not a conservative ideological magazine.
No, but
it's not a magazine.
But you're missing the point. The point is the content generates clicks, and that is how Facebook is amassed like a trillion.
Facebook
let me jump in
not
here.
the platforms.
Let me jump in here.
We have a Facebook problem. I don't know why I'm defending the Daily Caller since they spend half their time attacking me, but we have a Facebook problem much more than a Daily
Pretty
Caller.
successfully, apparently.
Because they are not.
Just to put things in perspective.
They are not content creators. They're a platform for the stuff that.
It's a perfect media conversation, right? I mean.
And because the Daily
Cara,
Caller
I'm
is putting
coming.
it out there,
Hang in there.
Facebook's getting the money. They're sort of picking the pockets of the Daily Caller and every other online publisher. But the fact is, that kind of content generates more interest, more clicks than any other kind of content.
Okay, and so tabloid newspapers sold 5 times as much as broadsheet newspapers in the old days. So you could argue that it's not fun. So the economics of media have always favored rabble-rousing, emotion. You know, what is the local news story from the old days? If it
Bleeds, it leads.
If it bleeds, it leads. I mean, I don't know. So, I'm somewhat alarmed about the whole Facebook thing. I mean, the internet is a very challenging technological change, which has positive and negative consequences. But I think we shouldn't be too nostalgic for the.
Cara, I want to come to you partly because you're a student, and partly because you're a student, you have a perspective that's more focused on the present, and you're frankly more in touch with younger conservatives and younger news consumers, as are you, Amber, which I think is really helpful. But Cara, if we think about what Bill talked about with the early days of the Weekly Standard and other conservative publications, which were to engage ideas and to establish certain conservative ideas, free trade, smaller government, lower taxes, these were sort of the standard core of ideas. The Trump earthquake was to challenge the fundamentals of fundamental ideas that defined Republicans and conservatism, and the media is trying to figure out how to manage that, really. So when you and your friends sit around and say, here's what it means to be a conservative, here's what we stand for, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of focus in on the main ideas of free enterprise, limited government, traditional values, and I mean, I personally don't believe that Trump is a conservative, and I don't think that he embodies any of those values. So I think that it is a little discouraging to see kind of the diverse conservative news organizations that used to exist now becoming more Trump-focused. I mean, I used to intern at the Washington Examiner, and I know now, most recently, they laid off a bunch of more Trump-skeptical reporters. So, like, especially 2 of my supervisors that actually used to work there were laid off because they weren't exactly, like, in line with the Trump, I guess,
Were they told that? Were they told, was that the reason?
They didn't go into the details about it,
It's
but
not
they
accurate.
said that they had felt that they were fired because of their Trump, like, their opinions on Trump.
I have sources at the Examiner who told me that's not accurate.
And what was the reason these people were laid off?
They were not performing.
I think I know a little bit more about the Examiner, maybe, since we shared
That's
offices with
possible.
them.
That's possible.
Yeah, the idea that Trump did not enter those calculations is false. Whether they were laid off for that reason, who knows? It's not appropriate to talk about individuals, you know.
Well, yeah, we're talking about 2 specific individuals, and in terms of those conversations, there was nothing about Trump brought up, or nor should it have been, because that was not the calculus.
But it's certainly the case, if you look at the Washington Examiner, which I know quite a lot about, in its attempt to replace the Weekly Standard, the whole explicit sell, and this is literally the case in their emails and letters trying to get people to subscribe, is we're friendly to the administration. We'll be critical when we have to be, but we're friendly to the administration, unlike that Weekly Standard that was hostile, which is fine. Again, it's a free country, and if the Examiner wants to be friendlier to the Trump administration, they can be. And we have the Bulwark now online, which has taken up some of the Weekly Standard cudgels. So I'm not resentful of this or anything, but I do think it is true that Trump and Trumpism has put more pressure on conservative media than would normally be the case because of a kind of the ferocity with which people hold to Trump as a person, which I think is much greater than certainly for Bush or McCain or Romney or any.
You didn't see that with Reagan?
A little bit with Reagan, but in fact, commentary and public interest, National Review even was critical of Reagan at times. I think that was nothing comparable today, and that is a Fox.
George Will called them the amiable duns, remember?
Yeah, I mean, there were times when he was working with Gorbachev, the conservatives were suspicious and all that. I think it's some combination of Trump's own demagoguery, Fox, which has a big effect. I think it's a different effect than the internet effect, but for the Fox effect, it's just been very big in sort of changing the center of gravity from an ideological sympathy to a kind of denunciation of heretics.
Exactly, and you put your finger on it with your question. Fox and Daily Caller and Breitbart and Rush Limbaugh and the Washington Examiner, they have ceased actually to be conservative media. They are grievance media. They, much as Trump has benefited from the politics of resentment and run away from all of these bedrock conservative and Republican principles, these media organizations have gone right along with them, and that's because the cash register rings.
Well,
It has nothing to do with ideology. It has nothing to do with conservatism.
By the way, the same thing is true at MSNBC and CNN and all these other. But the cash register is ringing across the board here. Right? Les Moonves, in his former role as CBS, he was right. This is good for ratings.
I don't say the comparison is specious, but we're talking about a question of scale, and we're talking about fundamental integrity. And MSNBC is many things, including boring.
Not when I'm on.
You just take that sitting down? I mean, really?
Except for your spots. But it's also completely predictable. It is also, its business is validating the worldview of its audience in the same way. But it doesn't break the rules of evidence and intellectual rigor along the way. And all of these organizations we've named today do that as ordinary practice.
I sort of feel like it's the old joke, talk about conservative media, conservative news. It's neither conservative nor news. And I think the issue is that it subscribes to neither, at least in the traditional sense. I think even his biggest fans will agree that Donald Trump's brand of conservatism has relatively little to do with free markets, rule of law, limited government, separation of powers, constitutional government, all of these other principles that were used, frankly, by the conservative media to great effect to criticize President Obama. And those are no longer in play. And in terms of news, the fundamental difference, and I want to add something to the numbers we were just talking about, is there an effort to get the facts as they are seen right, or is the effort to try to eliminate facts or to make up facts that support a certain worldview?
Or to take selective facts.
Or to take selective facts.
Okay, now that's always been, that's been a standard practice in media and journalism for a very long time.
And we are all subjective creatures. We all make our own delineations on what we present and what we see. I would say, though, that we shouldn't get too carried away with the numbers. I think the Washington Post has put out this number, and the New York Times is a little bit bigger than we are. They have 100 million people a month. We have about 90 million. The level of contact is dwarfs. But what they have done is they have propagandized a specific worldview. And so they have been able to weaponize Donald Trump's philosophy. They've been able to keep their troops sort of in line with a very clear carrion call. That's not obviously what 100 million people are getting from the New York Times, or 90 million people from the Washington Post, or, and I don't know what the number is, USA Today is bigger than all of them.
Amber, you're a White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. When you're at the White House, and there's a lot, I mean, there are a zillion things we can discuss about this, but I want to be specific and kind of put you a little bit on the spot here. So you could say that the Washington Post obsesses over counting the errors or the misstatements that Donald Trump makes. You can say that CNN obsesses over the president's tweets, but he does misstate facts. And he does cross the line of any president that I've covered or seen, in my experience. For whatever their reasons were in the past, presidents felt they had to try to pick off the opposition in various places because they needed to create coalitions so they could prevail, whether legislatively, politically, whatever. Donald Trump doesn't feel that. He plays to the base, and he does what's needed. When you're on the job, when you're on the beat, and the president misstates something, just flat out gets it wrong, or when he issues a tweet that is, you know, whistles or gaslight, how do you cover that?
I cover it accurately. For example, when President Donald Trump incorrectly stated that he never said that Mexico was going to write a check for the wall. I covered that, and I pointed out that it was a misstatement because it was. During the campaign, President Donald Trump released a memo to reporters saying specifically that Mexico was going to pay for the wall and that they would cut a check. We also have an organization called checkyourfact.org. They just did a fact check, I think it was yesterday or the day before, calling out President Trump for his claim that wind turbines cause cancer. Obviously not true. But my ultimate goal when I go into the press briefing room is
Stay away from the windmill, right? We'll all stay away from the windmill.
I know that there are a lot of reporters in there who are planning on asking about the same exact thing, and they'll ask about it with slightly different words, and maybe they'll say, well, I want to follow up on what my colleague said because you didn't really answer, and that's fair, they're allowed to do that. But when I go in there, when I'm looking at it from a conservative's perspective, I want to give the viewers, and I want Trump to get, or Sarah Sanders, whoever happens to be at the podium that day, I want to get information from them that's different than what the prevailing narrative of the day is. I'm not there to kiss the White House's rear end. I'm there to get information and do my damn job.
Let me ask you all this, and this is a jump ball, so weigh in on this. Very interesting piece that was written by Jonathan Swan at Axios, Trump's conservative media comfort trap, that he actually is ill-served by this. And he wrote, conservative media pose a surprising risk to the Trump administration. While outlets like Fox News' opinion programs provide unstinting positive coverage of his administration, close presidential advisors and White House officials, as well as the president himself, often lose their inhibitions and make damaging comments when they speak with friendly outlets. In other words, they're almost setting a trap for him and poorly serving him. Now, he is talking to Lou Dobbs and Sean Hannity all the time. And by the way, that's not that unusual either, right? You know, we know that editors of the Washington Post used to talk to Democratic presidents and administrations. But what about this idea of this too friendly conservative media being a trap for the guy?
I think he has a point, and the point is not that the conservative media is too friendly. I think it's more about the fact that we treat the president more fairly than the other news outlets, and so he does feel comfortable talking to us. And a lot of news outlets will actually use the strategy when they're interviewing Trump of trying to purposefully not be overly combative because he likes to talk. You can ask an open-ended question and Trump will answer for 15, 20 minutes, and during that answer, he'll say something that makes news, that he's not supposed to say, something that's inaccurate. For example, if you look at a recent Daily Caller interview with the president where my colleague Sagar Enjeti was one of the interviewers, they were asking Trump about voter ID laws. And during that interview, he said something that was played on MSNBC over and over again, that you need an ID to buy cereal. So there's a truth to what Jonathan Swan is saying there, but it's not about friendliness, it's about we're fair and the president appreciates.
What's unfair?
Of course it's about friendliness. Come on.
And what's
just
unfair
all fall off the
asking
media
the president for accountability?
You characterize it as friendliness.
All right, one at a time.
Quiet, wait.
Don't tell me to be quiet, that's very disrespectful.
It is impossible to watch Fox, to watch Sean Hannity, to watch Lou Dobbs, even to watch their program selection choices during the daytime, which is supposed to be straight news, and not see that that is entirely supportive, entirely friendly. It's a cocoon. That's why he watches it day after day, hour after hour. That's why he repeats their false slides. That's why he gets facts wrong, because they get facts wrong and he just regurgitates it. That's why he looks to them for confirmation whether he wants to shut down the government. They are, for him, his connection to the base, and for them, they are their way of saying to their own viewership that they have influence, they have power, and they do. But let's at least be honest. Fox is not fair. They are Trumpian in their willingness to make up facts, to ignore facts, to not simply cover major developments when they're not very friendly to the president. And it does misserve him because apparently, although maybe he knew better, he thought he was winning by a mile in 2018 in the midterm election. And clearly, he got kicked in the keister.
Bob?
I'm having trouble getting past the idea that journalism, which is holding elected officials accountable for their statements, including in excess of 5,000 lies, violating all the norms, of fighting with the institutions of his very own executive branch, ridiculing ex-prisoners of war, questioning a judge's honesty based on his ethnicity, attacking Gold Star families, and the whole long litany of bizarre, I would say, sociopathic behavior. I don't understand how that even enters the realm of unfairness. What I call it is journalism. And the notion, this notion that I've been hearing now for a number of years, that the so-called mainstream press is biased against the president. I don't know. If you catch somebody shoplifting in your store twice, and the next time they walk in, you give them, you're paying close attention. Is that bias?
No, but it's bias.
That's
if you accuse them of
experience.
shoplifting if they didn't that time, right? They reached conclusions about the president based on what they already know about him to be true. So, for example, just last week, a number of members of the media fell for a year-old deceptively edited clip wherein President Donald Trump referred to the MS-13 gang, which rapes and kills people, as animals. The mainstream media had already seen this clip. It was a year old. And yet when a random Twitter user put the video out and insisted that the president was talking about asylum seekers, you had people like Chris Hayes of MSNBC retweeting it, calling the president a Nazi. It's because it confirms their biases that already exist.
Do you not understand the difference between bias and experience, between bias and history, between bias and evidence? I don't see anybody criticizing the sporting press for obsessing over Chris Davis's 0 for 50. Oh, there you are again with the 0 for 50, just like we knew he was 0 for 47.
But are you defending, I mean, with all due respect, are you actually defending the performance of the mainstream press over the last 3, 4, 5 years? Do you think it's been, I'm just asking an
Bill,
analytical
first of all,
question. Not unfairness.
No,
Do you
I
think
understand.
they've done a good job
I will say
of explaining
this.
the situation?
I make a living finding fault with the mainstream press.
Okay.
That's how I make a living.
I don't care about the fairness issue. I'm just saying, don't you think we have a real problem in this country in the way the press is covering politics? Do you think people, because don't you
We
think,
have huge problems about the way the press is covering policy, but I don't think we have huge problems the way the press is covering Trump.
I do.
Because Trump is an aberration.
You don't think CNN enabled Trump in 2015 and 2016 more than Fox did, probably?
Of course.
What about
Well, no. Yes.
Zuckus'
Yeah.
comment? What about Jeff
Most likely.
Zucker's comment?
Right.
I mean,
When we turn away from,
I mean, it'd be nice
from
if
Trump, that's
liberals,
bad for business.
It would be nice if liberals worried a little more about the liberal media's failings, because they have done a terrible job, in my opinion, of defending important institutions.
That'll be another, we'll come back to another panel.
That's another panel.
Yeah.
I'm not
No, I mean,
for Fox either. I mean, I'm just saying, I don't.
I think-
So,
I think-
but just
the fact that the Daily
just to
Caller is friendlier to
crystallize
Trump,
your question.
they're allowed to be friendlier to Trump.
Just
I mean-
to crystallize the question, yes, I believe the mainstream press has done terrible things through its whole history. It has institutional flaws. It makes the same mistakes over and over and over again. And yes, its attention to Donald Trump's rhetoric through the election, through the whole campaign, may have gotten him elected. So absolutely. But that is not the same as unfairness to him or bias. It is about reporting what has happened and holding
But your suggestion
elected
is that
officials
because
accountable.
Trump has been bad before, that the mainstream press should assume that he's bad in this instance before we even know what the facts are. That was your suggestion.
Well, first of all, in general, yes. If someone does the same thing
That's
over
bias.
no, it's not. Is a prosecutor biased for looking at the arrest record of someone who they're investigating for a crime? Of course not.
Well, actually, in fact, juries aren't allowed to often know previous.
I'm not asking about juries. I'm asking about prosecutors.
We're going to be pedantic here.
So, Cara, save us from this
Actually, or
conversation.
if it's a pattern in practice, but that's just,
Look, believe me, no one is more, I think, anti-Trump on this panel than me, so I have good credentials in this. I
will
just
take
think-
exception to that.
I think we have a fair point. No, I think we have a lot of different media problems, I guess the way I would put it. I think it's unfair for you, though, to lump Fox with other. Daily Caller is more pro-Trump than I would like, but Daily Caller is not like Fox.
Right, they're not making up a conspiracy theory about a young man who was murdered. They're not, having Tucker Carlson,
just
who
Fox is-
now goes on Fox and utters the
Whatever, I mean-
language of a white nationalist.
But also
Can you give us
That's
an
not who
example
you
of
guys
that?
do.
No,
So,
yes, I mean, I
so
could do that on Tucker, I think, but I mean,
Yes.
but well, it's not worth getting.
All right,
It's not worth getting.
Cara, I want to come around to you, and then I'd like to open it up to your questions, because there's nothing more to discuss here, right? You're a journalism student, right?
Yes.
You're a young conservative woman in Washington, D.C. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Suburbs of Chicago.
Suburbs of Chicago. So you come from a city, but from the middle of the country.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of the kind of media that you would like to do, and that you would like to emulate, what do you think of?
I think of one that kind of sticks to this, like the traditional standards of the media, including like fact checking. And I mean, I'm an alum of the National Journalism Center at the Young America's Foundation, and which is a conservative organization, but they do teach us kind of just the basics of reporting, which I think a lot of people, regardless of like what side, if it's conservative or liberal, honestly have kind of fallen or forgotten about in the age of Trump to kind of meet their narrative, whether it's liberals or conservatives. I think kind of as someone mentioned before, we are catering to an audience because America is more polarized, honestly, in like one of the most polarizing times. So they are catering to an audience, and it's kind of hard for people to find that middle ground media outlet because of course liberals have MSNBC, CNN, conservatives have Fox, Breitbart. There's really hard time for people to find something that is honest, truthful reporting, down the middle with no agenda. And that is something that I think I would like to see kind of a return to. And if I ever do pursue a career in journalism, kind of trying to find an outlet that does just report the facts. I mean, that's kind of like in our dream like world, that sounds great, but that does report the facts.
Used to be what it did, kind of as a matter of fact, or at least we thought. And are you active on social media?
Yes.
Where are your social media platforms that you're most active on?
Mostly Twitter.
And what do you use Twitter for?
Mostly just kind of get my news. I follow like all kinds of like Politico, like everyone, and kind of everyone. It's like my newspaper. Like I scroll down the news feed and I see different stories, and that's kind of how I get my news. And
what you see on social media, do you find that informative? Do you get facts from social media, or do you find that your social media world contributes to some of this very harsh, conspiratorial, demonizing language out there that the rest of us see when we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think my Facebook is a lot different than my Twitter because my Facebook, I'm obviously friends with a lot of conservatives, and they may post only conservative news websites, some things that may not be true. But I think on my Twitter, I do try to have like a fair like spectrum, understanding where certain outlets have their biases. But I do think that a lot of people can get stuck in their bubbles and kind of just reigniting what they already believe. They want to have their beliefs confirmed, which I do think is kind of a danger with social media. Let's
open it up to the audience for some questions. There's a mic there, and feel free to go to the mic and offer your name and wow. This is enthusiastic. And it's all guys. That's got to change, okay? All right, that's got to change, but go ahead.
All right, well, thanks for being here to everyone. My question is, you kind of touched on this a little bit in general in the back and forth that was going on, but kind of expounding on that to a second part. Do you think, I guess, like, obviously there's a lot of problems, like you mentioned, Nick, brought the problem with the mainstream media. I think when I look at it now, the biggest thing, I think that it contributed in a large part to the rise of these, more fringe outlets, in part because, like, I'm not very pro-Trump at all. Like, I didn't vote for the president. I'm in YAF as well, but I'm very skeptical, more aligned with the more, like Mark Thiessen, who was here yesterday. But like, there's a lot of times I turn on CNN and I try to watch as much of it as I can, or I read the Washington Post opinion column, and I can't even like get through a column or can't get through, a whole segment because I feel like even for me it's too much. And that I can see why for a lot of conservatives.
What do you mean it's too much? What do you mean?
Like I get a lot of like it's pushing a narrative to me. Like it seems like there's not really a conservative thought that's being represented like in a lot of these segments. So like I can see why it's attractive to a lot of conservatives.
So what's your question?
I can see what's attractive to a lot of conservatives to try to run to these fringe outlets. Do you think that if the mainstream media did a better job of maybe more representative or maybe including more conservatives in these discussions, that you might be able to win back some of these people, or do you think it's gotten to the point where you're not going to be able to?
Let's ask a conservative, a center-right columnist for a mainstream news organization that is often seen as liberal.
Our audience has been growing exponentially, but for two reasons. One, we do real investigative reporting that you cannot find other places except perhaps the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And secondly, because our opinion section is the most ideologically diverse you will find anywhere. You will find me, you will find people to the far left, you will find people like Henry Olsen, who's a very mainstream, very serious conservative thinker. You will find things on culture, you will find things really, sort of the entire array of opinion labeled as opinion. And it's from those two sources that we've continued to grow. So we're growing from somewhere. Somebody is coming back, or someone who never read us is coming because our subscriptions and our readership is going up.
Bob, what do you think about that? That mainstream news organizations that are seen as so liberal and carrying a narrative could do a much better job at incorporating other, and presumably by that you mean more conservative, voices in a more prominent way?
Well, some people believe that mainstream news organizations in their news columns actually bend over backwards to have political balance that is actually irrelevant to the subject at hand. And that leads to the problem of false balance. So, that's one aspect, one dimension of this. Another is, as Jennifer says, the opinion sections of the major newspapers are quite scrupulous about having a diversity of voices. But there's one thing that these mainstream news organizations have that almost none of the organizations we're discussing today have, and it's called news. News with reporters and questions and multiple voices and context and analysis. What you see on TV and what you see I would say in most conservative media is not news. It's not reporting. It's talking about stuff that has already been litigated in the news. There's hardly any news on cable news. It's panels of people
that's
gossiping
across
about
the
what
spectrum.
happened already, right? But in newspapers where the people you're discussing are so frustrated because they're not seeing their worldviews represented, at least they're getting raw information contextualized based on evidence and multiple viewpoints. On these outlets that we're discussing today, you don't see that at all. You just see a lot of cherry picking, the fallacy of favorable enumeration brought to bear on stories where the outcome of the reporting is predetermined. So whatever you think about the mainstream news, at least they're giving you news.
Let's go to the next question so we can get as many of you in our remaining time.
Amber, you were talking about the...
Introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you. My name is Mark McKibben. I'm a junior here in political communication. Amber, you were talking about the Russia investigation. You were saying there were specific examples of stories the mainstream media reported that were directly contradicted by the Barr letter. I was wondering if you could continue your answer on that, giving the specific media stories that you were referring to, and what specifically in the Barr letter contradicted those stories.
Sure. Just to be clear, I wasn't saying that they were directly contradicted by the Barr letter, but rather that they were false in general. So, for example, CNN reported that Anthony Scaramucci was under investigation as part of the probe. That turned out to be incorrect, and in fact, 3 CNN employees resigned as a result of that reporting. Another great CNN example was when they reported that Donald Trump Jr. had advanced access to WikiLeaks based on an email he received with an encryption key, when in fact he received that email a day after the stolen Democratic documents had already been released publicly. Another good example was, of course, BuzzFeed's story claiming that Trump had directed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress, which was, in an unprecedented move, directly refuted by the special counsel's office. And the list goes on, but those are 3.
It doesn't go very far on and on. It goes to about 12. And each of those 12...
I've done a list of at least 25,
okay,
so that's incorrect.
25.
At least.
And each of those... Hold on a second,
I was
please,
very
Amber.
charitable to them.
Okay, you were charitable. Let's say it's 100. In fact, let's say it's 1,000. But in every one of those cases, the news organization, when they realized what they had done wrong, they immediately owned up to it.
That's not correct. BuzzFeed is still standing by the
and they stand by their story. And we don't know why Mueller said what he said, but we don't know it's your interpretation of the events. The point is, there have been 1 million stories about Trump in all of the mainstream media. Maybe it's 600,000, maybe it's 5 million. It's a large number. The number of errors that were made is trivial against
But they were the biggest stories and the biggest story of the past 2 years.
I would like to.
The mainstream media was
only the most inconsequential stories
They were
wrong, guys.
accountable for their errors. And what the organizations we're talking about today runs the same misstatements, the same propaganda, the same premises, the same tropes. Some of it nativist, some of it racist, some of it misogynist, some of it entirely contrary to direct, often video evidence with impunity. with impunity. You do not hew to the same standards that the mainstream press.
Give me an example of a story that the Daily Caller got wrong in the past year.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
Because I don't actually.
Then don't malign us as being not factual.
But I'll tell you what, you give me the website for the Daily Caller in 5 minutes and I'll be able to answer your question.
You can find it. I would just want to say I am not a fan of the Daily Caller, as I think Amber and Tucker know, but this is an example of why this young man said he gets exasperated when he looks at a mainstream paper, or frankly, when he probably gets exasperated when he listens to someone like you. You shouldn't actually say the Daily Caller does this if you've never looked at their website.
Well,
Fox, you're right.
The website. You're right. Except I do look at his website.
I listed 3 concrete examples, and you can't give me one. That's very telling.
Because I didn't come with a list.
I want to say.
Well, if you're going to call us misogynistic and racist, then you better damn well have an example.
All right. I will exercise I think you've all made your points, and I think it's always better when you're going to accuse to have a fact or a specific that you can cite.
Well, excuse me, I just want to clarify this, because this will go beyond today. This is important, Frank. I did not accuse the Daily Caller of misogyny, sexism, nativism, but I am saying that about the news organizations we're talking about today, leading the pack, Fox and Breitbart.
See, I'm going to say this, all right. I think we all have to be careful in all these conversations we have about media, about painting with a broad brush. Media is the most plural word in the English language, okay? And whether it's, what anybody has said here tonight, we just have to be very, very careful. I covered the White House for many years, okay? I covered it for CNN. I felt that my job, and I interviewed people, I did our interview show for 7 years, okay? And I interviewed Democrats, Republicans. I felt my job was to give everybody a hard time. That was my job, okay? You have a plan, you have a proposal, how are you going to pay for it? Where's the money supposed to come from? How do you know it's going to work? What is this built on? Because every politician spins, right? Where we are now, and the problem that we've got now, is we have cheerleading media, okay? And that's often on the conservative side. And the conservative side is cheerleading more for their candidate, their guy, Donald Trump, than the liberal media did for Obama. There were plenty of liberal media that pointed, because they wanted to pick this and that apart. I'm not forgiving it on either side, but what I am saying is I think we have to be very, very careful with the broad brush. Very careful with the broad brush. Next question.
Hi, thank you all for coming. My question is, I'm Theo. I'm from George Mason University.
Another George.
Yes. So my question is for Bill Kristol, who I follow your Twitter feed. So I'm curious as to where the conservative movement and media is going with young people. Obviously, a lot of young people, I assume many in this room, like Ben Shapiro. And a lot of them don't particularly like Trump. Do you think that the conservative movement, Fox News, and just the conservative movement and the Republican Party in general can survive the Trump presidency in the long term without the Republican Party looking at just being unelectable in the future?
I think it's an extremely good question, which I could give a half-hour answer to, and I won't. I mean, look, for me, that's one of the great concerns about Trump. I think just as an electoral matter, Trumpism is a dead end because it appeals to such an older demographic and on issues that I think are ultimately going to be on the losing side. And I think there's a huge diversity, though, incidentally, among younger, let's call it younger conservative media. The Bulwark's audience is actually quite young. I do these conversations online that are an hour and a half long, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to be able to do online. Half the audience for those is 35 and under. Ben Shapiro has discovered through a combination of sort of, troublemaking stuff, but also some very serious and long-form stuff, actually, has gotten a huge audience. So I'm very agnostic, I guess is what I would say going forward, as to how it all shakes out. One reason I'm so anti-Trump is that I think he will discredit a lot of sound aspects of conservatism and stalling a rethinking of conservatism that was probably necessary anyway. Maybe that'll happen outside of Trump and outside of politics and outside of the Republican Party to some degree with Ben Shapiro and a million other people. So I think it's a very fluid and uncertain moment.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next question.
My name is Matthew. I'm a sophomore here at GW. First off, thank you guys so much for being here. This is really cool. And as a Trump-leaning conservative, I'm starting to love Bill Kristol, which is kind of scary.
I'll fix that soon.
Please. Right. But my question is more for you, Mr. Rubin. I've got a lot of respect for you as a voice in the media. And I feel like
Now it's going to come.
Yeah, that's always
you know I gotta tee it up.
The wind-up, now the pitch.
Yeah, gotta be respectful.
So how could you even imagine writing what you wrote?
So, yeah, so like I was saying, I have a lot of respect for you in the media. And I feel like a lot of the never Trump Republicans, they take this mindset that they are consistent in their views and that a lot of conservatives and the president are the ones who are changing. I did a cursory scroll of your Twitter, and I just looked back at some of your previous statements on the Paris Climate Agreement, where you said it was a piece of paper, it's not an accomplishment, it shows the fantasy world of Obama and Kerry, that it's nonsense and a group wish. But then when you look at what you said when the president pulled out, you said
those are two different things.
A political act.
Oh, wait, let me answer your question.
Can I just finish what you said real quick?
Then you can correct.
And then, yeah, thank you so much. That it's a political act, that it signals solidarity with the climate change denial right-wing base that reveals scientific illiteracy, and being a climate denier, which entails dogmatic opposition to the Paris Agreement, is a dog whistle to the far right. And you tweeted out in 2015 a post from Senator Inhofe supporting that.
Actually.
So.
Number one. Number two, I've never been a climate change denier. There is a fundamental difference between making an evaluation at the time whether something is going to be productive or not, and later saying, is it productive or not to pull out? What is going to be the consequence? Those are two fundamentally different things. So those are not contradictory. In terms of the Never Trumpers, I think you have to be really pretty much, in the Kool-Aid to accept that there are conservatives now who advocate things that they never would have tolerated under President Obama. If you remember, and I was one of them, I complained bitterly, they complained bitterly when President Obama issued an executive order for DACA, saying he had overstepped his bounds, that he had to go through Congress. They have been cheering and they voted to uphold a emergency declaration on the border. That's only, one small thing. When the conservatives for years have screamed that the executive is too powerful, that Congress needs to step up to the plate, they're the ones saying, we don't even want to know what's in the Mueller report. We don't want to contradict any of these nominees. So you can kind of go down the list, whether it's free trade, whether it's market economics, whether it's rule of law, whether it's constitutional government, and there's been a complete inside out. And the worst case, of course, is the social conservatives, who we really haven't talked about much at all. But these, of course, are the greatest frauds out there. These were the people who wanted Bill Clinton impeached. These were the people who set a standard of moral conduct. And these were a group of people who claimed that character mattered, ethics in government mattered, claimed, you can go back and look at those lovely speeches that Lindsey Graham read on the House of the floor during the impeachment hearings about telling the truth, about character. Poof, it's all gone. So listen, it's not an unusual thing for people to change their mind. But what is unusual is the degree to which conservatives have debased themselves, the degree to which they're willing to lie and reject their own principles in order to stay in alignment with the president. And that's part of the difficulty that the right is having, is that it's an intellectual honesty problem.
And that's part of what's reflected in the media. I mean, that's it really is it's a fascinating thing. I think we have time for two more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two more questions. Sorry, guys.
Alrighty. Hello, my name's Garrett. I'm a proud SMPA student, also Republican. Thank you all so much for coming. It was really interesting, Ms. Rubin, that you said kind of at the end, conservatives are debasing themselves in service of President Trump. But President Trump is a person. He will at some point leave office. And in the meantime, we've witnessed this very radical shift in what the Republican Party stands for and what conservative media acts like and stands for. This is to the entire panel. Do you think this is something that's permanent? And if so, is that a good thing?
Yeah. as Bill said, that's sort of the $64,000 question. We're always sure things are going to last for forever until they change overnight. So we were all certain that Donald Trump was never going to get elected because conservatives don't believe in that kind of stuff, and they're free traders, and they're small government people. And then it stopped. Then there was something else. So it matters what we do in the interim. It matters what you all do in 2020 when you vote. It matters on what we write and the degree to which we are presenting facts in a persuasive way. I think any group of people that fetishizes a single character, that makes it into a cult, is in deep trouble. Because particularly one as inconsistent as this president, they will turn themselves in circles as they have already done.
Who else wants to have it then?
Please, I'll go
ahead,
after you.
Okay, thank you. I'll be brief. You know, this panel is examining where Trump is taking the conservative media. It almost, and I think Bill alluded to this earlier, it almost doesn't matter where Trump leads it, because the conservative media are doomed. So are the mainstream media. The media economy is in a state of collapse. It is a spiraling vortex of ruin. And I don't need to give you...
Spiraling vortex of ruin.
And
Wow.
I
I don't know, we're doing pretty well.
I mean, news organizations aren't profitable, newspapers are closing, TV networks aren't profitable, cable TV, that business model's gone. Magazines, forget about it. It's essentially over as an industry. We're not at the tail end, but we're in the middle of the end. So conservative media, unless they sell a lot of merchandise on their websites, they're not going to get advertising or subscriptions to keep them alive. This is the New York Times. Well, the New York Times actually will survive. But 80% of what's left, and a lot is gone, 80% of what's left will not exist in anywhere near its current form in my lifetime, let alone yours. So media, it's a bad situation for all players. My concern is that, and by the way, Trump is, he's going to be around for 4 more years or fewer. We shall see, 5 more years or fewer. But when he's gone, he's not going to be gone. And my concern is this industry that has been built around Trumpism, which is bellows on the fire of Trumpism, which plays the same rules as Trumpism, will have, by the way, Trump may be out of office, but there are still 30 or 50 million Americans who are right behind him, freshly militant, fully aggrieved, filled with resentment. And my fear is that this industry, such that it is, has helped create that militancy. And when Trump's gone, and maybe when the Daily Caller or Breitbart are gone, they're still going to be there. And this is not just about politics. This is about ongoing damage to our society. I believe in the short, bright life of the conservative media that we're discussing today, that the damage has been incalculable. And I fear for you all, soon it will not be my problem. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, the oldest living American. I'm in the home stretch, but I have children and grandchildren, and I am terrified about the society that we're leaving them. And one of the things that terrifies me most is this movement that this industry has helped foment. And
well, I'm not quite so pessimistic. The Daily Caller is profitable, and we just started a subscription system that's actually doing quite well. And I think the problem with some of these other outlets who are struggling is that they have, and I actually agree with Jennifer on this, that people have fetishized Trump too much, whether that's in a positive or negative direction. And that's a mistake for any business model, to make your business contingent on one person, one personality, or even one party. That's why you see places like Breitbart, they still get a lot of readers, but in many ways they've fallen out of fashion with the fall of Steve Bannon. The Huffington Post and BuzzFeed News have laid off writers. And if you read the Daily Caller, you'll notice that it's not all about Trump, because readers do get Trump fatigue. He will leave soon, 4 years or 5 years or less, as you say. So it would be a mistake for any news outlet, let alone conservative media, to place all of their eggs in the Trump basket. So I think the answer is to stay committed to truth and facts and to our readers, and not committed to an individual.
Thank you.
Last one.
Hello, I'm Wyatt Dobrovich. I'm currently taking a gap year, and I'm a student of the NJC program. Yeah, fair and balanced journalism. But I've seen mostly everyone up on the panel tonight have criticized Fox News and as propaganda machine. And I've read a lot of articles recently from the New York Times, Politico, really digging in deep into Fox News. And I think it really misses the point, because I think that you could watch certain shows. Yes, Sean Hannity. I personally don't watch it, but you could watch other shows like Special Report, The Daily Briefing with Dana Perino, Shannon Bream. There's different hardcore journalists, Chris Wallace. And I think a lot of people have conflated tonight about what Fox News is, and I think that's contributing to this problem that everyone up here, or some people up here, have said that there is. So I would ask the people who have criticized Fox News tonight, why are you conflating the two? Because I think Fox is opinion. There's Fox, and then there's the news. There's Fox News. They're both. So
I think three things. One, they intentionally blur the difference because they give Sean Hannity roles that in other organizations news people have. CBS sends a real news person to interview candidates after a debate. They don't send an opinion person.
Yeah, but except CNN used to send Larry King to do that. I mean, there was criticism internally then that you were sending somebody with softball questions instead of the reporters.
But at least he was not an ideological cheerleader for the person he was going to cover.
That's very true. I mean, where Hannity goes is completely different.
So, number one, they blur the difference. They also go on each other's shows. You have Chris Wallace appearing on Sean Hannity's shows at times. Why, as a legitimate news person, does he do that? Secondly, even in the so-called straight news shows, their issue selection is completely coterminous with the president's agenda. And we know from reporting why that is, that it comes down from on high, and that entire topics that are non-issues are the subject of endless stories, and other topics that are not so friendly to the president are avoided. So there's an issue selection problem. And third, Fox makes its money off of the evening shows. That's who they have on the billboards. That's who they market themselves to. It's not Jennifer Rubin saying that Sean Hannity represents Fox. It's Fox saying Sean Hannity. He's a big moneymaker. And it's those big opinion people who Fox has made a business out of and who they advertise to the public. So I think the concern is absolutely right, and they should take the news logo off those evening shows because it's not news.
Bill, do you think Fox is ever going to regret being so much in the Donald Trump tank?
I don't know. I mean, I tell you, the future's a long time away, and for now they're doing, I guess, quite well in their own way. I do think Fox was always conservative. It always had a mixture of, more opinion and more straight news. I think the mixture has changed over time, and also the ferocity of the opinion has changed. And that for me, is a big deal. And the evening shows, which are the most watched, are not just conservative or very conservative. It's not like, they're really strict libertarian or strictly, right-wing in certain issues or, strongly pro-life. That's not it at all. That would not be the problem, honestly. It's that they're so, I would say, demagogic and conspiratorial in tone. But I think Chris Wallace I was on that show for 8-9 years, and I think that remains a very good show. And Bret Baier, I think, there's been pressure to make the panel more Trump-friendly because the Fox viewers are so pro-Trump, and you can get a bit of a vicious cycle. And also, so it isn't quite what it was, in my opinion, 5, 6, 7 years ago. But, I mean, look, I think one can also Fox is important. I think it's unusual. It's important because of Trump, though. I mean, we shouldn't, let me maybe just make this point. Conservative media has a variety of things, good, bad, indifferent, extremely somewhat demagogic and somewhat responsible, and all kinds of gradations in between, and that's the way the world's going to be at a huge modern democracy like ours. It's Trump's magnifying and exaggerating effect. The President of the United States, we've never really had a president, in my view, who is happy to foster hatreds, I will even say, who called twice in the last 24 hours, has called his opponents, once the Democrats, once the Mueller team, treasonous. I mean, okay, it's a tweet, and we're all supposed to move on, or we're all supposed to ignore this because it's just the way Trump is. But it really is kind of astonishing. And that is a kind of rhetoric that we haven't seen from Bush or Obama or Clinton or Nixon. Maybe you see once or twice from them, but not every day. And I think that has a real effect on the body politic. I mean, this in a way is your point, but more that I think what worries me the less is the media organizations remaining Trumpy after Trump. If there want to be, there could be 20 million people in the country who are less for free trade than I am, and another 20 million who are more anti-immigration than I am, and all that. Having a president, I think, has really changed the equation. I don't think we'd be having this kind of discussion if Hillary Clinton had gotten 77,000 more votes in 3 states. There would be, conservative media would be all over the place, and some of it would be rethinking free trade, and some of it wouldn't be, and some of it would be a little conspiratorial, and some of it would be high-toned. I think Trump has really changed the character of our politics. He's changed the character of our media in some respects. Obviously, he would change being on the right, a conservative media more than, but he's changed the liberal media too in some ways, obviously.
And you know who's lost, Bill?
And so Trump, I think, that's why I'm sort of slightly obsessed with Trump. I mean, I think from a business point of view, one should look beyond Trump. But actually, as a student of American politics and society, I think Trump is having a lot of different effects, direct and indirect.
And he both has those effects, and he reflects them.
Yeah, true, absolutely.
I mean, I think one of the most interesting things to think about here is, and this has been asked for a long time, we used to talk about it at CNN when I was there, are we leading the public or are we following them?
No, I agree with that.
Are we setting the tone or are we reflecting the tone? And I have concluded that it's much more a reflection than a setting. I mean, there is something much larger that has happened to our culture and to our politics. And this is reflected everywhere. It's in social media, it's in traditional media, it's in non-traditional media, it's in our popular culture. There was a really interesting article written not too long ago about just how dark about many of these Netflix dramas are. There's a darkness in our culture now, and it's kind of hard to find heroes. And the media, whether popular or news, is not exactly set up to help you have heroes, right? You think about, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. I mean, everybody was cheering for him. You think about whether it was Reagan in his way when he came in, and times were changing then, or Kennedy. I mean, there was this moment where you could sort of suspend disbelief and actually think that maybe something, big was happening, and I worry about that. I'm going to play a TV producer here, which I never did on TV, and give you each 30 seconds to give us a wrap-up thought, and then we'll say thank you very much and let everybody move on. We are in and we are moving into the political season, all right? And there is no journalism arguably more important than political journalism because it sets how people set their ideas around candidates, reach their conclusions, and ultimately vote. This is largely a mediated experience. Many will go to a rally and hear a candidate or candidates personally. Most will consume it through media. What do each of you think the conservative media, which has been the conversation point here this evening, face as the largest obstacle to doing a good job? You get to define good job in this coming political campaign?
I think they're so intent on following the Trump script to paint the Democrats as all socialists that they miss the reality. The reality is that Joe Biden is by far the most popular figure. The reality is that a plurality of primary Democrats are consider themselves to be either moderate or conservative. That there is tremendous difference between Amy Klobuchar and a Bernie Sanders. So by conflating this all and having this kind of Trump-friendly image, they don't help voters to make a decision about which one they would like. And they do misrepresent our politics. In that respect, they promote further polarization. There are many candidates who are much closer to the center in the Democratic Party now than there are Republicans, frankly.
Bill?
First of all, I like those dark Netflix movies. I think that's that part of life needs to be represented too. And there's some excellent art in those movies and shows.
I'll have to get your viewing list when we're done.
Exactly. Of course, I've forgotten what important. Well, you mentioned. Well, I'll just make another second point, which is not really responsive to your question, but you mentioned media. Most people get, but isn't one of the big stories the kind of disintermediation, if you want, of our access to politicians and to politics? I mean, it is really remarkable how much you do see actual politicians talking. Now, sometimes it can be snippets can be taken out of context and they can be a year old. It's still him, though.
That's a very good.
And I think I don't know. I think 2020 will be a very maybe the first time we've had a huge. Maybe 2016 was, but we have a huge Democratic primary. It'll just be interesting to watch. If when we're running a Democratic primary candidate's campaign, how would you speak to voters? Would you depend on media as much? Would you try to get beyond the media? Social media is obviously very different from the networks and from the traditional media, et cetera. So I think things will continue to change pretty rapidly in that respect.
And to that point, I think the greatest thing that has happened are the CNN town halls, where you have an hour with each of the candidates, regardless of where they are in the polls, and they talk.
Yeah, no, I'm all for more exposure to candidates is a good thing, sort of.
Well, I wanted to bring up something that we sort of touched on earlier in the panel, just really briefly, which is the implication that conservative media is doing really well in business because of Trump. And I'm not sure that's accurate. I think conservative media, because it started out as an alternative to something else and it's been comfortable being sort of the opposition, I'm very firm of the belief that if Hillary Clinton had won, the conservative media would be doing much better and they'd have a lot more stories to cover than they are with Trump. But besides that, as I'm going into the 2020 election as a reporter—
Will you be on the campaign trail, or will you still
I won't be following, I won't be traveling with them, but yeah, I'll be covering it. And my goal is just to give voters as much information as possible about each of the candidates so that they can make an informed decision.
So what do you see as a big challenge to conservative media to do the good job?
Well, there are some places that I think do too much cheerleading. I don't think the Daily Caller is one of them. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased. But I think the biggest challenge will be conservative outlets need to break more news. We do our best to do investigative reporting and break news. And someone on the panel mentioned earlier how a lot of conservative outlets kind of are aggregators, and they do a lot of things that have already been really pushed out through the news. So I'd like to see conservative reporters out there on the ground actually breaking stories and doing some hard-hitting reporting as opposed to just clipping the biggest news stories of the day and pushing them out on Facebook for clicks.
Clara, what do you think?
I think that one important reason that Trump was elected was because a lot of people saw him as being representative to like flyover country, like people who are forgotten about. And I think that one thing that I heard that was really interesting actually is Bernie Sanders is going to be going on Fox News and doing a town hall. And I think that a lot of people who maybe voted for Trump can also resonate with Sanders because they're both kind of vying for that audience of the forgotten about person. So I think that one interesting thing that conservative media will have to do is they don't have a plethora of candidates to choose from this time. They have the one nominee who is Trump. And they kind of have to see if Trump has represented these people who elected him, if he has stuck up for kind of the forgotten man, or if someone like Bernie Sanders maybe would be better representative of these people. So I think that that's one kind of concern that I think the conservative media should have, is that there's such a diverse range of Democratic candidates now who are going to be vying for this nomination, going against the already pre-selected person. So kind of showing if Trump has been representative of these people that he was elected to represent.
Bob?
I guess, unsurprisingly, what I just have to offer is a lament. I have, for my whole adult life, I've been a consumer of conservative media. But my early career was a very different animal than it is now. And when Fox News came along, I was quite excited that there was going to be such a thing. Because while I don't subscribe to the whole idea of left-wing media bias destroying the society, I did believe that there was room for a conservative-based media outlet that examined issues of the day from a conservative point of view. And then Fox became what it became, Breitbart became what it became, and Rush Limbaugh and so forth. And my lament is that as we go into this obviously important 2020 election, the media, the conservative media that we have to cover is not thoughtful and rigorous, intellectually honest, fair, evidence-based. It's polemical and demagogic as a group. And the biggest losers, if I understand the makeup of this room, are y'all. It's you. Because you have no place to turn for a perspective that you can trust to broker the news of the day and the issues in the election, and that's tragic. And, you know, I know I come off as the Sandinista on this panel because I've become radicalized over the years. But fundamentally, I just think the whole thing is sad. There is room for serious conservative discussion and debate. And we're going into this 2020 election without it.
So I'll take the last pass here, and I see some folks here who I met this past weekend, and thanks for coming. And I may have referred to myself at the time when I was speaking at St. John's Church as a glass half empty optimist. And I often do think of myself. I mean, I look at the glass and it's pretty half empty. And you can point to a lot of things that aren't there, and the lament becomes real. The optimist in me is struggling, but it still is still there. There is a lot of there's a lot of great journalism in conservative circles, in middle-of-the-road circles, and liberal circles. Increasingly, it is the responsibility of the news consumer to find that. It is not going to be handed to you in the same way. It's The Guardian, it's The Economist, it's The Wall Street Journal, it's The Daily Caller, it's Bulwark, it's all these, it's Axios, it's the Washington Post, it's the New York Times, it's CNN, it's MSNBC. But and what we've done and what we've conflated terribly is opinion and reporting. And that's very confusing for people. And people are going to have to educate themselves on that, to separate that out. I think the point that you made, Bill, I think it was Bill, about candidates doing their own media now, you know, I actually made a mistake when I said most of this is a mediated experience. When you look at the millions of views that Beto O'Rourke had, or that Buttigieg has, all right? I mean, these are the most unlikely of candidates, and they've gotten millions and millions of dollars and followers, and it's not through the CBS Evening News or the Daily Caller or NPR, a lot of it. Some of it is, but most of it is because they're out there and they develop these incredible followers. That changes the dynamic. Nonetheless, the role of the media, mainstream, conservative, whatever, is real. The responsibility is real, and I think that some of what we heard tonight is really both a warning and I think very informed and informative about how that's going to break down. Hitch your wagon to any one person, and you hitch and you ride at your risk. And I hope that carries through. And I just would leave my long-winded monologue this: all media should bring skepticism and a hard-edged look to any candidate, because all candidates want to persuade and win. So pierce that bubble a little bit. Would you join me in thanking this great panel? Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks, Cara and Yaffers. Appreciate that. All right. Thanks, all.